I am so excited to be interviewing a relative, my special guest, Roland Pacheco. His mother is my first cousin, and he's a tattoo artist, a painter, an author from the Big Island. Authored several books, in fact. He inspired me to write Mama's Gotta Let Go. His books include, I know, History of Polynesian, an autobiography of his life, which is what I read and inspired me. It's lessons that he claims has helped him to maintain his happiness, which is very enlightening, and it's the reason why I wanted to interview him, because Roland may not be a dad, but I think his life experiences have taught him, so many lessons that I feel parents can benefit from. We just talked a little bit, and I really would love you to share a little bit about your journey, but also how do you think parents can save their sanity while raising, resilient, respectful kids? But first, can you give us a little bit of your history and background?
Yeah, my parents they got divorced when I was really young, so I was about 2 or 3. Um, and they both lived very different lifestyles. And so, you know, being raised, having, to go between Hawaii and the mainland, um, it gave me kind of a, really unique insight into the possibilities that my life, could offer. Hawaii is one of these places where, there's not a lot to offer. You kind of have to just fall into this kind of lockstep of, I'm going to work in a hotel or I'm going to do something tourist oriented. And on the mainland, it's different. You can do whatever you want, go to school, get an education and stuff like that. So it was kind of tough, being a kid, having both of these things presented to me. I didn't really know which one to follow. In terms of, my guidance wise, I really didn't have much guidance from my dad, and my mother, she worked a lot. So I was a latchkey kid for the most part. And so a lot of the things that I learned in life just happened to be from trial and error, and being able to figure those things out on my own, because I did have a lot of time on my own.
So what do you think would help parents raise kids, because they're still latchkey kids, there's still kids who aren't guided, but I think parents feel so responsible for raising the right kid, the right,
Sure.
And according to you, your success, you were on what, Ink Master, you have your own business.
Yeah.
And yet you did not have your traditional way of parenting where you're guided, where you were
No.
taught these life lessons and how to prepare for adulthood. So how do you think parents can help their kids without being so how we were talking about, like that dictator type
Sure.
raising?
The thing is like, if like I don't have children, so, but I have a lot of I've had a lot of interactions with people, a lot of very close friends, and kids are really just people, and I think that's kind of the thing that a lot of people forget. They're like, well, I made this thing and it's my sacred, this is a reflection of me, and and it's like, yeah, I guess if you want to look at it that way, but it's just a person. Your kid is just another person to somebody else. You know what I mean? So my parents didn't necessarily take, my father was, again, he was a kind of an abusive person, but he was more, like, when he saw the way that the mainland was influencing me, that was a giant, red flag to him. And he would rally against, all things progressive. But it's kind of one of these things where I think, as a parent or just as a person, we fail people we come into contact with on a daily basis, even if we're trying not to. So someone asks us advice and we give them advice and they say, hey, thanks, and they move on. We don't see them or talk to them for a while, but what if they act on the advice and that advice turns out to be bad? You know what I mean? Do you then say, hey, well, what did I do? I failed this person. For the most part, you're like, this person asked me for advice. They're going to go out and they're going to fail. They're going to have to figure it out on their own. And to some degree, when we were talking about critical thinking and the importance of children being able to critically think, to have that, you know, that's the importance, because you will fail as a parent. And your child, you know, when you're a kid, you're looking at your parents like, hey, these people know everything and they're untouchable. You slowly realize that's not the case. But you know, it's one of those things where you have to allow yourself to not be perfect, to not have to be perfect, because you know, your kids aren't going to be, they're going to fail, but they're going to have to be able to understand that, yes, when you do say, you know, excuse me, dog's going to start barking. When you do tell your kids something that you've contradicted yourself prior to, like you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
Your kid has to be able to go, well, hey, she said this, she told me to do that, she's doing the opposite thing, I'm totally confused now, what should I do? They should have the ability to use critical thinking to make that decision of like, well, maybe she's stressed out, maybe she doesn't really know what she's talking about, maybe somewhere in between I can come up with that decision myself. And I think that's the most important thing, is just to be flexible, not to be so rigid. You know,
Mm-hmm.
because once you're rigid as a person or as a parent, you're locked in and you can't change, you can't go back on those things. So why would you want to lock yourself into this position where you know you might not necessarily be able to sustain that view? Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. Well, I think that's why we feel like we have to, you know, I mean, if you're a parent, say you're a parent who smokes, and then you're telling your kids not to smoke,
Sure.
you're telling your kids not to drink alcohol, but then they're at parties and they see their parents totally wasted, but they're like, you know what, don't drink. And
Sure.
then, you know, that's like a total, but you know, other things like you don't mean to lose your temper,
Right.
right? You must be calm, and then you just lose it when you see your kids doing something like the report card, or they're,
Sure.
you know, they're logging on to distance learning, then they're taking a half an hour shower, they're just, you know, then you just blow up, and then your kid doesn't feel well valued. You're right. They don't feel like
Sure.
they're worth anything, because their grades do define their worth.
Right.
How do you think? I mean, how do we, as parents, realize that we are not responsible for their like misbehavior or their decisions?
Oh, yeah, that's a hard question. I mean, it's a hard one to answer, because you know, you as a parent, as a thoughtful person, you want to make sure that your child is represented, you know, representing you and themselves in the best light. And when they're not, that's a reflection directly upon you and your parenting. Um, or so you think. You know, you cannot control every situation, you can't control every person, everyone's different. So to just, you know, put yourself in the position again where you can't control a situation, although you want to have this specific outcome
Mm-hmm.
based on your perceptions of what this person should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you're setting yourself up to really, like, again, not be happy, to not find that happiness, and not allow the other person to be happy too. Because you know, when you're trying to define all these things for people, and you're trying to tell them, don't touch that, it's hot, don't do this, you'll get hurt, 1 + 2 = 3, or whatever, you know, we're putting our own experiences, we're pushing those onto somebody else. You know, we're saying, hey, you don't need to go and figure this out, because I already did, and this is what the
Right.
outcome is going to be. And that is not necessarily what you want to do. And as a parent, I could imagine you're going to be like, don't do that, you're going to get hurt. And your kid's like, well, I want to do it. And you have to say, like, to a certain point, well, then do it, because when I'm not around, you're going to try to do it,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. I want to make sure that I'm here to watch you jump off this cliff, or whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't know how you would reconcile that, because you know, everyone's different.
Mm-hmm.
People are
Mm-hmm.
all, expectations of their children are different. You know, some people just want their kid to get married. That's, hey, if they can
True.
get married, then that's all I care about. Some people want their kids to be, you know, 3 doctorates, you know what I mean? And it's
Right.
like, there's a certain point where just as a human being, and our conditions that we put on ourselves and other people, they're projections of what we expect of ourselves to some degree, or maybe what we've been told we should expect from ourselves, but they're not realistic at all. I was told, believe it or not, my entire life that I could never make a living through art. Like,
Wow.
yes. And that was something that I was told from day one when I was drawing. Yes, you can draw. Yes, you can do this, but you will never make money at it. You will never make a career out of it. You need to do this. You need to be an accountant.
Oh
And
my
so,
gosh.
yeah. And so I went hey, I'm in college. I'm, taking accounting classes. The most boring thing I could ever put myself through. I missed one day and I was totally lost, which is probably why I could never, save money or balance my checkbook. But still, that was what I was told. You need to have, a career where you will make money. And again, from both of my parents, there was adversity. There was like, you have to do this in order to succeed. And from both of my parents, for some reason, I was like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to succeed no matter what happens in spite of this all. And even if I fail, which is the most important thing to me, if I fail, I'm going to fail on my own terms. I want to do what I'm going to do. And if it kills me, then it kills me. And that was kind of my whole attitude, through grade school and through high school. And it was kind of like this saying, I don't know what it was, from the Three Musketeers or something like that, or Cyrano or whatever, but it was, I'd rather, die on my knees or die on my feet than live on my knees. And it's like, that was what it was for me. It's like, I'm going to fail. I'm going to be my own failure. I'm not going to take your past failures and clump them together with mine and be like, you're right, you did fail at this, so I fail at this. You know what I mean? I turned it around, and luckily I've been able to make a living for art for the past 30 years. So yeah, it was kind of one of these things where I don't know if my parents helped me so much as they did to motivate me to do what they said I couldn't do. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. So do you think that created, I mean, when you talk about your pathway to happiness, if there's one thing that parents can do to help guide their kids to happiness, because there's a lot of shoulds, right? Parents have a lot of shoulds. What is one thing that you think could guide, I mean, both parents and kids on their path to happiness? Because there is way too much, especially during the pandemic, way too much stress and hopelessness, right? A lot of pessimism.
Sure.
But don't you think even now we can still
Well, I
travel
think
that
right now,
path?
yeah,
It's
for sure. Yeah, I mean, right, this what's happening now, it's, there's, who knows what's going to happen. And we're all trying to maintain our level of sanity. I'm not really working at all, so my whole life was traveling, tattooing abroad and making movies abroad and coming home and tattooing, and I can't even leave the island, and so I haven't been able to really work. And I'm trying not to go crazy, but at the same time, I think, as a parent, for me, the best thing that could have possibly happened would be of my parents to say to me, look, I'm just trying to do the best job that I can. I'm just trying to make sure that you, don't end up homeless on the street somewhere. And the things that I tell you and the things that I'll be able to share with you are my experiences, and take them as such. But understand that you need to fail. You need to go out and experience life. You need to go out and do things in order to boost your self-confidence, in order to have self-worth. Because I was an example of someone who was told that I was going to be worthless. And I took that and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be worthless. I'm going to be something that, I'm going to make my something out of myself. And I know it's hard for a lot of people to be motivated by and not be crippled by. And some of those things, the residuals of that still bounce around in my head. But for the most part, I got that self-confidence just because I was thrown into situations that I had to figure out on my own. And as a parent, I think nowadays, maybe they don't want their kids to figure out these hardships. And you kind of need to let them.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of need to let them figure these things out. You need to let them understand that driving a car is a huge responsibility. Yeah, it might be scary, but you could run into a bunch of people. You could, but there's things that you need to figure out the consequences of those actions and understand them fully. Maybe that's one thing that could help parents, is to just understand that it's okay to fail. It's okay if your kids fail. They actually will be helped by that.
Wow. Well, then it'll change our perception on failure, because when you asked me how I felt, did I personalize my daughter's F's? And yes. I think every parent, when you see that F, you think, I could have done something. And we think we have this power that we can, I don't know how, if your child's not motivated or they just don't want to, we don't have this magic wand. Okay, you will get,
Right. Yeah, and I think that's what people expect. We talked about the instant gratification thing too, and people just want to be great at something right out of the box. They don't want to have to learn. They don't want to have to put the time in, and that's just unrealistic. Would you want a doctor that was fresh out of school, or would you want a doctor that's 25 years experience? And we all know the answer to that. But at the same time, people have to have a realistic expectations of themselves and what they can do. And I think a lot of times nowadays people just have this, I don't know where it comes from, but they have this thing where it's like, I'm going to succeed at everything. And it's like, that's a great attitude, but
unrealistic.
It's very unrealistic. I mean, it's kind of one of these things where, like, and I said in my book, it's like, I've done so many things in my life that I shouldn't be alive. I've done so many
I
crazy
remember,
things.
yeah, that was a very
Yeah.
powerful. Can you say, how can they find their book? What's the title of the book?
My book is Happiness is Complicated, and it's on Amazon. And happiness is complicated. It's a very, very complicated thing. You are not going to find happiness like you find an Easter egg. It's just not going to be that way. You're going to have to work at it. You're going to have to work at sustaining it. And it's not something like, you just attain and it's there. You have to maintain it. And that was something that took me a really long time to understand, because my happiness, which I didn't understand, was what had been told to me was actually my parents' happiness. Their ideas of what was happiness was, thrust upon me as a child, and that's what I thought I had to do in order to be happy. And again, that's what we talked about, in terms of what you tell your children and you expect of them, and they're on their own journey. There's no way that my father's experiences or my mom's experiences would line up with mine at all. In fact, the way I lived my life was completely opposite to the way they lived theirs. But it's important for people to understand that your happiness, you can't tie that to other people. You can't expect your happiness to come out of expectations of other people and what they do. People are always going to let other people down. People are always going to fail. People are always going to do these things that are very human things that need to happen. People need these experiences in order to understand. Nowadays, I think a lot of kids just run away from failure, and they run away from things that are scary and things that they don't want to confront. And that's just not a healthy way, I think. I mean, like we said, we were raised differently, for better or for worse.
So just embracing the failure and knowing that you're not destined to live a life of failure just
Right.
because you experience like many failures.
Exactly. I mean, so when I took my accounting class, that was like I said, the most boring thing I've ever done. So at that point in time, some circumstances happened, and I dropped out of college, and I formed a rock band because I wanted to be, a rock star. And that was kind of what really my mom was like, oh my God, when she saw that, it was like, you're doing everything that I told you not to do. Now you're, playing music and in clubs and drinking and smoking, doing all these things. And so I kind of went the opposite way. But again, I was like, hey, I'm going to own this. If I fail at this, then I fail at this. It's fine. And so for about 8 years, I played music, and I was a starving musician. I worked dead end jobs. I never had a dime. I couldn't rub two pennies together.
On the
But my
mainland?
love was yeah, but my love was playing music. And so, you know, we ended up getting to the point of, you know, getting signed, and then you realize, oh my God, these people are going to suck my soul dry. And then you spend 8 years trying to get to this point, and you're like, I really don't want this now. What do I do? So to me, that was a failure, and it was a colossal failure, because I'd spent so much of my time trying to make this happen. Um, but I couldn't let that define me either, you know. And I took the experiences that I'd learned from playing music, and I just spun them into like my own businesses and having another career in art. And you know, I was luckily being able to spin that off into something positive. But in terms of me following some sort of map, or, you know, guidance, or having guidance, I had none. And you know, it was kind of like I was trying to be my own worst enemy, and I ended up coming out of it in a good place, which is good. Um, but you know, it was a hard journey,
But don't you think
definitely.
it's proof, though, that you do not need a defined map to follow, and that parents do not need to say, okay, you need to do this, you need to apply to these colleges, you need to get that scholarship, you need to major in a very lucrative, you know, career path, or else you're
Yeah,
going to be a failure.
right. There is no, and I think, again, like, I am not a parent, but I could imagine what it would be like to have your child be a total failure, because you'd be like, oh my God, I'm a total failure.
Hmm.
And so you don't want that to happen, obviously. Um, you know, but the whole roadmap, the whole, you know, 2.5 kids and all this stuff, and you need to have a house and a car and all this, that's just, it's really outdated. It's an anachronism, you know. It's something where, yeah, that worked 50 years ago,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, but it doesn't work now. And the, you know, this year I turned 50, and I it was my year, you know. 2020 was going to be my year. All these things were going to happen. I was going to do this, I was going to do that. Well, obviously we know what happened, but um, you know, I'm ready for the other chapters in my life. What's going to happen? You know, I don't look at things as so cut and dried. Like,
Hmm.
if I do this, I'm going to end up here and do that. Um, I just kind of go with it. You know what I mean? And that's the beauty to me of life. And to have people understand that, yes, you don't have to follow a roadmap. You know, um, what this whole thing with COVID has taught me really is, do what makes you happy, because that's what you can, the only thing you have control over right now. You know, so if you want to sit around and be upset or mad or whatever, then that's your choice. But you also have the choice to sit around and do something worthwhile, make a garden or paint a picture or something,
And
right?
do what makes you happy, not what you think your parents, you know, because I think that's
We,
what
yeah,
happens, right? You want your significant other, you want your parents, you want your grandparents, and then that complicates. Doesn't that complicate happiness when you're
yeah,
not, because you don't even do what, you don't even know what makes you happy. What makes you happy is what makes your parents happy. And that's,
right. Because those things are tied together, right? I mean,
yes.
you know, and it's hard to say. Um, like I said, I was kind of a feral child. You know, I was on my own a lot, so I I really had to figure out what those things were that made me happy, and that's what I talk about in my book. I went through so many different phases of, you know, with happiness. It's kind of one of these things when you're a kid, you're happy just playing with your little dolls or your GI Joes or whatever you're playing with. You know, you're going to
Hmm.
go and
Hmm.
have a tea party for 10 hours, and
Hmm.
time's going to fly by. You're not going to care. As we get older, though, people put their conditions upon us, and they say things like, hey, you know, what are you going to be when you grow up? Are you going to be this? Are you going to be
Right.
that? And so we start thinking about, like, hey, maybe I want to do this. Maybe I want to be a fireman. So you stop playing with your dolls and you're playing with a fire truck. And eventually what happens is, you know, we start to reflect the views and you know, the expectations of those around us. And we adapt those into our own, hey, maybe that's what we should do. You know, maybe this is, you know, the path. And we really don't know what the path is yet. You know what I mean? So you're taking all these things in, and you're like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then you realize 10 years later, I shouldn't have done any of that. You know, um, sticking to what's true to your heart, to what's true to yourself. To me, that's kind of what's always been my thing is I just do what I feel in my heart is right. And that's very vague. And I know it's not really
Well, but it
advice.
sounds like the 8 years of music wasn't a waste. I mean, it sounds like every experience you had was the path, and you never,
That's
did you ever
exactly right.
regret? Did you ever regret, or just say, you know what, that experience led me to this experience? Because who'd have known that a musician would turn into a tattoo artist, and then that
Right.
koi? Can you describe that koi painting that covered your entire floor?
Yeah.
That was not like a little 8 by 10 painting. I mean, can you
It's big.
describe that?
It's,
What's the size? Roland painted
it's,
this amazing koi, well, carp, the Japanese carp fish, and it was just
yeah,
amazing.
it's on the
What was
floor of
the
my studio.
what was the size of the
It's about 20 by, that's about, yeah, 20 by 30. It's 20 feet by 30
20
feet. So it's,
feet
yeah.
by 30 feet?
Well, yeah, maybe 15
I
feet,
would
but
I
yeah,
would not
it's
want
big. It's
to.
a garage floor.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even want to step on it. It was just so gorgeous. But I think you even mentioned, and if paint spilled or if something, it would
Yeah,
just like blend into the design. And I thought, wow, most people would say, don't ruin my masterpiece.
yeah,
And you just, it's like, well, and I love that. I think that in your soul creates happiness because you don't allow anyone to like pop your peace bubble. I mean, the pandemic,
exactly.
that's hard, but when you know you're in control and you don't let others pop your peace bubble.
Yeah, no, that's true. Um, you know, for me, one thing that I did before the pandemic was, every time I'd go to work, I drive to work and I would say to myself, hey, this is your last day on earth. Um, and I would look at the, ocean, and I would look at the sky, and I would look at the mountains, and I would really just in my heart be very appreciative for those things, because I would be like, this is the last time you're going to see these things. Um, and that really helped to ground me into, being present. Um, and I think what this pandemic has taught me is that we look so far into the future because we base all of these things on the future.
Hmm.
We're going to do this, we're going to do that, you're going to be a doctor one day, you're going to be smart, you have to go to school and do all these things, and we don't take enough time to consider the present.
Hmm.
We are just spending so much time worrying about what could be, and that's where we get lost. A lot of the times, time just flew by with COVID here. It's like, yeah, time is going by very slowly, as it should be. I
Yes.
shouldn't have months fly by and me going, oh my God, it's another year. To me, that was just I was just too fast. I wasn't appreciating life as much as I could. And so, yeah, I mean, something like this, you know, really has let me, or has allowed me to understand just how delicate a balance it is to maintain my happiness. Because again, we concentrate on so much temporariness, in our
Hmm.
minds, everything's very temporary. We don't want to be where we're at. We're on our phones when we're talking to people. you know, there's um there's just too much time spent not engaging the now, and I think that's part of the biggest issue is just, yeah, man, your kid's failing in school. What's going on in your kid's life right now? You know what I mean?
Right.
What's happening right now? What's going on? Talk to them. Someone bullying them in school, they don't feel like they, whatever, their self-worth is down. At that moment is when you can impact change, you know what I mean? Implement that change too. And it's like, when you're thinking about that, well, if you don't do this now, if you don't do this right now, in the future, you're
Yeah.
going to be
In the
XYZ.
future, you are
Guess
going to
what?
be a
It's not,
loser.
yeah, it's not the future. It's the present. So what can we do now, to make this happen? What can we do now to make any sense of what's happening? I don't know.
Would also not define. I think we define their value based on their actions, their grades,
Sure, sure. Yeah, you take that personally. Like I said, when I've had apprentices, I take what they do personally, and these are complete people I don't have any connection to at all. but the things that they do, I'm like, oh my God. And then I start getting involved in their lives and I start
Yeah.
caring about what they're doing. And I'm like, these are just people that are working for me. You know what I mean? So I can
Well, they become
imagine
like almost family, right? And I think
right.
that's
Yeah,
what happens.
exactly.
You know, so can you imagine like when it's your child and you think, wait a minute.
Yeah,
But I like when
no,
you said they're just people, they're just little people. They're not an extension of us. We can't
no,
define our worth based on what
sure.
they do, right?
Exactly. And you've met people who, I've met people who, when they have kids, all of a sudden it's like they gave birth to baby Jesus. You know what I mean? And
Yes,
I'm
yes.
like, I don't know what to say. You know what I mean? It's don't take it so seriously, but there has to be some sort of understanding where, this is a person and you're raising a person. This happens to be your child, but this is going to be another functioning person next to another functioning person in life. And you have to make sure that these people are able to take care of themselves, to function in the society, and to flourish. You want to give them the tools to move ahead positively and not constantly be questioning what they're doing. Part of that
Wow.
is just remembering, we're all very fallible. We're all gonna fail. We're all gonna make mistakes, and we're all gonna learn from those things if we let ourselves.
What a powerful way to end. I think, and this is why you're showing me that there's so many, before it was like, mama's got to let go. You had to be a parent or like I don't know, a person who had experience dealing with children. And I'm realizing that so many people, in fact, you guys probably have more words of wisdom because you're not jaded with, these parenting expectations. You can actually have an objective view. And because of I love your journey because you are proof you did not need, or what happens when you don't have a map? You don't need a map because you navigated. Yes, it was a complicated journey, but wow, it was your journey. So
Yeah,
maybe is that the message then? Have parents trust in their child's journey, even when they disagree with it. I mean, what do you,
exactly. No, that's exactly right. And it's that when you asked me that question in the beginning, what can your parent do? That's exactly what they can do. And just have faith in that. Yes, you're gonna let your little bird out of the nest and it might crash on the ground, but that's just has to be part of it. That's exactly what I think people can do to make a better relationship, a better human being. Like when I tell people, people have kids that come into my shop, they're getting tattooed. Hey, I'm getting a tattoo for my kid and stuff. I'm like, awesome, great, but please do me a favor and just raise a really well-adjusted human being. Like that's all I ask. You know what I mean? Like,
wow.
have as many kids as you want. Just make sure you raise a human being that's well-adjusted, that can function, that has critical thinking, that you're going to allow them to experience life for themselves. We don't need any more closed-minded people. You know what I mean? We don't need we don't need people who cannot critically think. I mean, that's just, we're in a point right now where we're reeling from that. So, you know,
Thank you so much. This was fun.
you're
And
welcome.
sorry for taking up a lot of your time, but I think whoever's watching this is going to be enlightened because I think we are just, like you said, we're stuck in how we should do things and we worry about the future instead of just, like you say, be present, be grateful, and just be happy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's
Thanks,
been fun.
Roland.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, take care.
Okay, you too.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.